hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit, the promotion that never came and the system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa, please tell me what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you gotta be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that, but let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen, and within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambre, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Tap that screen, y'all, tap that screen. Let's get it. Top of the afternoon, everybody. Top of the afternoon. We are back at it with the book club, with the Afro Taino book club. If this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to reach the masses. Again, all lives will be uploaded onto YouTube. As you can see, the YouTube channel up here, everything is categorized. As of right now, we got 3 books up there: War Against All Puerto Ricans, the Huey P. Newton Reader, and Puerto Rico National History, which we're finishing out. We have about 3 hours left, so by today and tomorrow, we should be finishing out this book. And don't forget, in May, we are going down to Puerto Rico for the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project, so all gifts and donations to my platform will be going directly to the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. Without further ado, let's get off to chapter 11.
Chapter 11. The Road to Collapse. The 1970s and 1980s were decades of economic turmoil in Puerto Rico. The recession that took hold of the U.S. economy after the 1973 oil crisis created a ripple effect in its Caribbean colony. Attracting foreign investment had been a cornerstone of the government's economic agenda under Operation Bootstrap, hailed by Time magazine as an economic miracle. The annual gross national product fell from 7% in the 1960s to 2.1% in the 1980s. By the following decade, 58.9% of the Puerto Rican population lived below the poverty level, and unemployment reached 20.4%. The miracle had lost its divine agency. Faced with this dire situation, in 1974, Governor Rafael Hernández Colón created a committee to analyze the country's fiscal and economic conditions. Led by James Tobin, a Yale University professor who would later receive the Nobel Prize in Economics, it was charged with drafting a series of recommendations. The committee concluded, among other things, that Puerto Rico needed an economic strategy that was less reliant on U.S. capital. In 1976, the Hernández Colón administration successfully lobbied the U.S. Congress to implement Section 936 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. Previously, any U.S. corporation operating in Puerto Rico paid a 48% tax to transfer their earnings back to the United States. Section 936 allowed foreign corporations in Puerto Rico to repatriate their earnings tax-free. While moderately successful at first, it consolidated Puerto Rico's dependency on foreign investment, precisely what the Tobin Committee had warned against. The economic situation affected the multiple Puerto Ricos that coexisted within the archipelago in different ways. Many families migrated from the countryside to urban centers in search of better opportunities, but they faced housing shortages that forced them to settle in arrabales, shanty towns. This process had begun decades earlier, in the 1920s and 1930s. It was not uncommon for the police to conduct raids and engage in other acts of violence to evict members of communities living on rescued lands. Their residents, however, demanded rights and often defiantly argued that they would not move. On February 6, 1980, the tactical unit of the Puerto Rican police surrounded the house of Adolfina Villanueva Osorio and Agustín Carrasquillo, a black couple from the town of Loíza. They had been fighting in court to claim ownership of the land where their humble house made from wood and zinc stood. The Catholic Church, who claimed to own the land, demanded the couple's immediate eviction. As the police surrounded Adolfina and Agustin's house, one officer shouted, "We will take you out dead or alive." They proceeded to shoot gas canisters and bullets at the house. Agustin came out and was hit in the legs by 4 bullets. Adolfina ran inside trying to collect her 2 children still at home. Her other 4 children were in school. When she came out the door, Adolfina was shot 16 times. The bullets perforated her lungs and liver. She died on the spot, just 34 years old. Police Sergeant Victor Estrella was accused of Adolfina's murder, but later absolved of any crime. While Adolfina's case made headlines, the government continued to attack other squatter settlements. On May 18, 1982, the police forcefully and violently removed 300 families residing in the town of Carolina's Villa Sin Miedo. 1 police officer died in the operation. Many residents were wounded, and houses were set on fire. The government of Carlos Romero Barceló told the press that the hand of subversive leftists was operating in Villa Sin Miedo. The criminalization of poverty and the poor only increased over the following decade. These events and their public reception caused the Puerto Rican government to take a new approach to the housing crisis. As legal scholar Erika Fontanes Torres has noted, the death of Adolfina Villanueva Osorio and the events at Villa Sin Miedo forced the government to make cosmetic changes in its public policy with regard to housing through the reorganization of agencies and bureaucracy. And it also created new legislation seeking to facilitate buying property for poor and marginalized populations. In practice, however, not much changed. After Hurricane Hugo in 1989, for example, many poor families lacked housing, leading the government to create the Programa de Vivienda Permanente para los Damnificados del Huracán Hugo, Permanent Living Place for the Victims of Hurricane Hugo program, to assist poor families that had been impacted by the storm. In 2018, almost 3 decades after the hurricane, the Puerto Rican government acknowledged that many people who participated in the program never received their property titles. The program had been a failure. For the Puerto Rican middle classes, the crisis affected them in different ways. New patterns of consumption and market-driven ideologies influenced their spending habits. The proliferation of cars in mid-20th century Puerto Rico also changed the physical landscape of urban centers. Increasingly, shopping malls became important spaces for socialization. Credit cards also facilitated consumption and particular lifestyles at times when the economy was at a standstill. From 1985 to 1992, for example, Puerto Rican credit card debt rose from $455 million to $848 million.
Wow.
Debt prevailed among the middle classes at the same time that it became integral to governing. Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the United States championed free market ideologies that were circulating in the global economy. Termed
They're talking around Hurricane Hugo, so that was around 1989.
neoliberalism by scholars, these ideas promised a new way to understand the economy. But neoliberalism was also a new way to understand citizenship and social relations through the promotion of individualism, entrepreneurship, and privatization. The Puerto Rican government relied on debt to maintain the economy. The
Absolutely.
totality of debt from the Commonwealth, municipalities, and corporations was about $1.6 billion in 1960.
This is where we start going into the increasing of the debt in Puerto Rico to what we got today.
By 1990, however, this number was around $12.7 billion. As the contracting economy impacted Puerto Rican society, people on different sides of the political spectrum once again began to carefully think about the meanings.
If you were 5, I was born in 88, so I was probably a couple of months, depending on what time of the year it landed. I was on my way to being a year.
Of Puerto Ricanness. Reimagining the nation again. Ideas of the nation have loomed large in Puerto Rican intellectual production since the 19th century. Works of history and literature attempted to lay the foundations of a national identity distinct from Spanish colonizers. By the 1930s, conversations that had once taken place in private tertulias or literary soirees were now being held in public at the University of Puerto Rico, or UPR. A new generation of scholars began using the classroom and scholarship to define the essence of Puerto Ricanness, often articulating ideas that were rooted in racism and elitism.
Listen.
In the 1970s, the university served, once again, as a space where ideas could be put into practice. Influenced by events taking place around the world, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the Cuban Revolution, and global student protests, among other social movements, along with the invigoration of the Puerto Rican working classes, the militancy of the student movement, and the new struggle for independence, a young generation of intellectuals sought to move away from traditional understandings of history. New readings of Marxism from non-Soviet sources and less dogmatic understandings of socialism led to other ways of doing history. A new generation of scholars, most of whom had studied in France, England, and the United States, returned to Puerto Rico as professors at the UPR during a moment of social and intellectual upheaval. While not all of them knew each other, the urgency of the moment drew them together in what became known as the Centro de Estudios de la Realidad Puertorriqueña, Center for the Study of Puerto Rican Reality, or CEREP. These young intellectuals were part of what became known as La Nueva Historia, but not all of them were trained historians. Those who came together under the CEREP banner in the early 1970s had been trained in different disciplinary traditions like anthropology, theater, sociology, education, and economics. The phrase history from below was being discussed in academic seminars from London to Buenos Aires, from Cuba to New York. In Puerto Rico, faculty at CEREP took up the mission to think from below and shed light on those histories that had been purposefully overlooked by traditional historians. Their conversations and publications covered a wide range of then novel topics such as the histories of plantations, women and social action, and workers. These young intellectuals believed that to understand Puerto Rican reality, one needed to take into consideration marginalized groups first and foremost. While workers, women, and enslaved peoples had been traditionally ignored, they too had rich and vibrant histories from which scholars could draw examples and inspiration. For the members of CEREP, scholarship was political. It was an attempt to understand reality in order to transform it. While members of CEREP organized seminars and workshops, they also met with unions and other groups beyond academia in Puerto Rico. Community leaders, student activists, and university professors in the New York City diaspora also came together to create an intellectual space to think about the Puerto Rican experience. Their struggles led to the creation of Puerto Rican studies as a distinct field within U.S. academia. As Maria E. Pérez y González and Virginia Sánchez Corrol note, the underrepresented, powerless black and brown students had stormed the citadel, the symbolic ivy-covered towers of the senior colleges and the community colleges, transforming higher education in ways the activists could not then imagine. In 1969, the City of New York's Board of Higher Education secured funding for the creation of Puerto Rican studies programs, departments, centers, and institutes. By 1972, new academic departments and programs were established at Lehman, Hunter, City, Brooklyn, John Jay, and Queens colleges. Demands from students, faculty, and community activists in New York City also paved the way for the Centro, Center for Puerto Rican Studies, in 1973. This space served as a library, archive, and intellectual hub. Similar to scholars in the archipelago, Centro researchers helped forge an interpretive paradigm grounded in historical materialist and critical cultural theory. There was also intellectual dialogue and collaboration between scholars in the archipelago and the diaspora.
Listen.
Rafael Ramirez, one of the founders of CEREP, was recruited by Centro and was instrumental in creating their Culture Task Force program. These intellectual efforts led to new interpretations of the Puerto Rican past as scholars attempted to center voices, histories, and experiences that had been ignored. Such scholarship was a political project that they hoped could help transform their realities. That is, the past was not simply something that had happened, but something from which they could build new futures. While the meaning of Puerto Rico was being debated in university classrooms, armed movements for independence continued through the 1980s. One of the most active militant groups was the Macheteros. From 1978 to 1986, they committed 18 armed actions that called attention to Puerto Rico's colonial reality and sought to expropriate funds for their cause. The Macheteros shocked everyone. To avenge the two independentistas killed in Cerro Maravilla, they attacked a U.S. Navy vehicle in December 1979, killing 2 Marines and wounding dozens. In October 1983, they fired an M-72 rocket at the FBI offices in Atorrey in solidarity with the brotherly people of Grenada during the U.S. occupation of the Caribbean country.
I ain't gonna lie, that's crazy.
The
I didn't know that.
Macheteros understood these tactics in terms of propaganda. Their boldest actions were covered by local media and garnered international attention as well. On January 11, 1981, a Machetero commando snuck into San Juan's Muniz Air National Guard base and successfully bombed and destroyed a fleet of 9 fighter jets. There were no casualties, but damages were estimated at $40 million.
Right.
2 years later, the Macheteros successfully infiltrated and robbed $7 million from a Wells Fargo facility in Hartford, Connecticut.
Yep.
To counter the pro-independence armed struggle, local and federal governments moved from infiltration and state-sponsored terrorism to legal action. Shortly after the Macheteros' attacks, many independentistas accused of participating in armed actions were arrested and convicted. Their actions not only challenged local government officials, but also reminded the international community about U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico. The nation was also a powerful way to mobilize people to the ballot box. A bipartisan era began in Puerto Rico after the PNP defeated the PPD in the 1968 elections, ending its 16-year streak of victories. Since then, both parties have alternated power. The question of Puerto Rico's colonial status was the driving force in the 3 dominant political parties. The PNP supported annexation of Puerto Rico. The PPD favored Commonwealth status, and the PIP organized for independence. The only commonality among the 3 was their belief in the existence of the Puerto Rican nation, at least from a cultural standpoint. During the 1970s and 1980s, the PIP continued advocating for independence. The party's founder, Gilberto Concepcion de Gracia, had been a UPR and George Washington University-trained lawyer and journalist. When he died in 1968, membership oscillated between radical and socialist interpretations of what a post-colonial Puerto Rico might look like, and more moderate social democratic stances. These different views and aspirations gave way to inevitable tensions and splits. Eventually, the more moderate strand took hold and was represented by Concepcion de Gracia's successor, Rubén Berríos. Rubén Berríos was an up-and-coming lawyer in 1970 when he became the PIP's president. Just 31 and educated at Georgetown, Yale, and Oxford, his more moderate stance on independence allowed him to unify the party after the more radical sector was expelled. For the PIP, the Puerto Rican nation was already a reality. But because of its colonial status, it lacked judicial and political sovereignty. For them, only independence could provide a viable future for Puerto Rico. While the PPD did not advocate for independence and instead defended Commonwealth status, they agreed on the existence of a cultural nation. In fact, the PPD had been crucial in detaching nationalism from Puerto Rico's political status. When the party came to power in the 1940s, its ideologues promoted a sense of national belonging that did not pose a challenge to the relationship established with the United States after the creation of the Commonwealth and the Puerto Rican Constitution in 1952. Anthropologists such as Arlene Dávila and Jorge Duani have demonstrated how the PPD created a cultural apparatus through the Instituto de Cultura and the División de Educación de la Comunidad, or DIVEDCO, to promote the idea of the Puerto Rican nation from a cultural, not political perspective. It was clear by the 1980s that Operation Bootstrap had not accomplished what it was meant to. The PPD's economic project had failed and was now collapsing. But the cultural nationalism that had accompanied the PPD's rise continued to operate in Puerto Rico with great force. It was so powerful that although the PNP openly and aggressively advocated for annexation to the United States, they did so without abandoning the idea of a cultural Puerto Rican nation. The PNP had been created 2 decades earlier, emerging as part of the debates and tensions that took place over the 1967 plebiscite. When the plebiscite was announced, members of the Partido Estadista Republicano were divided as to whether or not they should participate. Some argued that it would only give power to the PPD, while others saw it as an opportunity to advance their pro-statehood agenda. From those tensions, the PNP emerged on August 20th, 1968, under the leadership of businessman Luis A. Ferré. The revolutionary fervor and radical politics of the 1960s not only impacted those who advocated for socialism and independence, but also altered conservative parties like the PNP. For example, when Ferré was elected the party's first president, Vicente Ita Jr., a former labor leader and lawyer, approached the podium and asked to speak. He had a gavel in his hands. Ita told the audience that the gavel had belonged to Santiago Iglesias Pantin, one of the most important labor leaders at the beginning of the 20th century. He gave it to Ferré, who noted, "I accept this gavel with a humble spirit and a sense of great responsibility, because this gavel belonged to a great man who was the redeemer of Puerto Rico's humble classes." To make statehood appealing to different social sectors, Ferré created the idea of the Estadidad Jíbara, or Puerto Rican statehood. For Ferré, statehood would grant more rights, protections, and federal funds. This could take place, he argued, without losing Puerto Rican culture. Culture became a dominant theme in conversations about statehood, and ultimately in their party's platform. When Carlos Romero Barceló took over the PNP in 1974, he published a book titled La Estadidad es para los pobres. Statehood is for the poor, in hopes of attracting the laboring masses to the party. The book reproduced 19th century ideas that had been consolidated by the PPD in the 1940s, chief among them the notion of Puerto Rico as the mixture of 3 races: indigenous, African, and Spanish. Now, however, Barceló added the North American influence as well. The book declared that Puerto Ricans were proud of their heritage. Because of that, Barceló argued, "Our language and our culture are non-negotiable." These discourses were undoubtedly influenced by the civil rights movements in the United States, as well as local situations in Puerto Rico. But they did not mean that the PNP became a politically radical institution. Puerto Rican scholars Rafael Bernabé and Cesar Ayala have noted, as a party committed to the preservation of the existing economic and property relations acting in a period of austerity, the PNP could not but turn against militant labor, student, community, and poor people's struggles when they did emerge. Even when Romero Barceló publicly stated that statehood was pro-poor, his government unleashed extreme state violence against students, land rescuers, and pro-independence activists. Romero Barceló lost his third re-election bid in 1984 to Rafael Hernández Colón from the PPD. Having served as governor in the 1970s, it was Hernández Colón's second time in office. He continued his party's emphasis on the cultural dimensions of the Puerto Rican nation to maintain the ambiguity of the Commonwealth's juridical status. This entailed strengthening the Hispanic legacy of the racial and cultural triad of the Great Puerto Rican Family myth. In 1987, Hernández Colón received Spain's King Juan Carlos I and Queen Sofia in the governor's mansion. A running joke at the time noted that he had ordered a golden toilet for the monarchs. To commemorate the 5th centenary of the colonization of the Americas, his administration organized a series of high-profile events. In 1991, the Puerto Rican government welcomed replicas of the Santa Maria, Pinta, and Niña, the 3 ships used by Christopher Columbus and the Pinzón brothers during their first trip to the Americas, and sponsored massive cultural and artistic events in honor of the colonization. The following year, in 1992, Puerto Rico participated in the organization of the Gran Regata Colón 92, a race across the Atlantic with more than 250 small boats. In the midst of all this celebratory fervor, the Hernández Colón government successfully passed a law in 1991 making Spanish the country's official language. As a symbol of gratitude for upholding its Hispanic legacy, Hernández Colón was awarded Spain's prestigious Prince of Asturias prize. The law was revoked the following year when Pedro Rosselló from the PNP was elected. His administration continued to promote Puerto Rico as a cultural rather than political nation. While neoliberal ideas had been circulating in Puerto Rico since the 1980s,
Yo, do you see how these politicians are like fucking up the cultural identity of the island to push their narratives to be able to get them what they want?
the election of Rosselló ushered in a new era in Puerto Rico's history, one of punitive and neoliberal governance. The era of Rosselló I. Pedro Rosselló was elected in 1992 with 49% of the vote. In a country embattled by economic distress, rampant criminality, and political corruption, people were drawn to a new face. Rosselló was young, energetic, and charming. My grandmother, 52 years old at the time, joked about how she was going to move with...
So really quick, everybody, whoever came in late, if you guys want to check out my YouTube, I got it on the screen right now. Same name is here on TikTok, AfroTaino88, and you can go check out the list. We have War Against All Puerto Ricans up there. The complete book is in 4 videos. The Huey P. Newton Reader, which is in 10 videos. And Puerto Rico National History, we have 8 videos. Today's video will make 9, and tomorrow's will make the complete 10. So you can go back on my platform, go listen to it. All the videos are up there. But we about to end this chapter out in 13 minutes. So let's end it out with a bang. Let's get to 10K, y'all. Let's get to 10K.
her boyfriend to the Fortaleza as soon as he took office. Rosselló was not a traditional politician. He was also respected in the medical community and had a clean political record. The PNP's record-breaking victory was complemented by their winning the majority in the legislature and 53 out of 78 municipalities. Former Mayor and Governor Carlos Romero Barceló, was elected resident commissioner in Washington, D.C. One of the marketing strategies of Rosselló's first campaign
Thank you for the
was
follow.
to downplay the political status of Puerto Rico and focus on the social problems that affected different sectors of society. This caused tensions within the party, and Romero Barceló, then a high-profile party member, publicly criticized Rosselló for not making the annexation of Puerto Rico the focus of his platform.
Thank you for the follow.
Given the election results, the PNP was certain that they would emerge victorious in the 1994 status plebiscite. To their surprise, the Commonwealth won with 48% of the vote. The results proved that not every...
Yeah, but what I'm realizing too, the more you push the culture narrative and you're removing the people from the politics, the more you'll be able to narrate and put the propaganda out there to manipulate the people to vote for the politics that you want them to vote for, because they have limited access to the information that's really going on. And this is what I'm really seeing right now. And this is why we, if you look at today's dynamic and situation, this is why we are the way we are right now. If you look at the removing of us from the political issues and the political dynamics and just focusing on the cultural and maybe some little issues that we have here and there, it's easy to be confused. Easy.
One who had voted for Rosselló supported statehood. But the question of Puerto Rico's political status was not the only focus of Rosselló's administration. In 1993, Rosselló named...
Mind you, they're talking about the father, not the son that got ran out. They're talking about the father right now.
Pedro Toledo, superintendent of the Puerto Rico police.
Because again, just like the United States, a lot of individuals who are in politics, their children transition into politics, and it's still the same philosophies, ideologies, same people in control, same hierarchy, you know.
He had been the FBI's second-in-command in Puerto Rico. In line with the Hernández Colón administration's policy toward crime, Toledo made the mano dura contra el crimen, strong hand against crime, a centerpiece of the Rosselló government. Rather than approaching crime holistically and seeking to change the social conditions that produced it, the Rosselló administration militarized the fight against crime.
And again, they're talking about Rosselló's father, the senior, right? The one who had office before his son did whatever the fuck he got caught up in the email scandals and got thrown out. They're talking about his father. So if you pay attention to the history of his father and what he's done, you can see how that shit works.
In February 1993, Rosselló gave a public speech declaring a war on crime. He activated the U.S. National Guard to support the police in controlling drug-related crimes. This entailed the physical occupation of caseríos, housing projects. Caseríos had been imagined in the mid-20th century as a response to the housing crisis.
Listen.
The government built these structures next to middle-class enclaves to promote social integration. Over time, however, caserío residents, mostly black and brown Puerto Ricans, were stigmatized as dangerous and problematic.
Listen.
So much for the racial harmony myth of cultural nationalism.
Listen.
Neighboring middle classes gated their communities, while the government mostly ostracized these populations. Such conditions were ripe for the creation of massive drug empires that connected some caseríos while pitting others against each other. The Rosselló administration showcased their policy toward crime during the first mano...
When you create a situation where no one can thrive, there's lack of education, lack of housing, lack of jobs, lack of anything, any resources, what do you expect people to do to survive? I don't condone it, but we're just speaking the reality, right? Because when you look at any place of poverty anywhere, right? What tends to be the outlet for income when you have lack of all of those services? The black market, regardless of whatever it is. And this is what the government understands but doesn't want us to understand. because it continues that cycle, right? Because again, when you go into the prison system, you become a slave again, you do free labor, the time, and all of that. And this is things that we don't consider today.
Dura operation. On June 5, 1993, the residents of Villa España were awakened by the sound of helicopters. A full-scale military operation occupied the 500-unit housing project. As scholar Petra Rivera Rido has noted, this was the first of 74 raids by the National Guard and Puerto Rican Police Department over the course of 3 years. The raids and occupation of caseríos continued until 1999. The mano dura policy sought to control, contain, and eliminate crime using militarized force. In fact, the policy criminalized poverty and treated the caserío residents like criminals. Meanwhile, the Rosselló administration was busy implementing its economic agenda. In line with global economic trends, the administration sought to shrink the Puerto Rican government through privatization. Rosselló's first test of the new model was the announcement of legislation known as the Health Reform, which would privatize the health system by auctioning off health services to private companies, with the government partly subsidizing each patient. To manage the new program, the government created the Administración de Seguro de Salud de Puerto Rico. During Rosselló's second term in office, his administration also privatized 7 of the major public hospitals in the archipelago. Rosselló continued the PNP's strategy of appealing to the masses while also advancing a neoliberal agenda. Neoliberalism with a populist face. For example, Rosselló's tarjetitas, a reference to the medical insurance card that many Puerto Ricans had for the first time, were presented as options to democratize access to medical plans. In practice, however, the reform created hierarchies between those who could afford private health insurance and those who carried the government's tarjetita. Because of bureaucratic complications, many physicians and doctors claimed that they did not receive payments on time and thus declined to accept patients on the government plan. Nonetheless, Rosselló easily won a second term in office. In the 1996 elections, his ticket was elected with the biggest margin in the country's electoral history. 2 years later, the party organized another plebiscite where statehood was once again defeated. While the mano dura policy and the privatization of the health system were seen as moderate successes by Puerto Ricans, Rosselló's administration was plagued with scandals and corruption. More than 80 people from or close to the Rosselló administration were either accused of, convicted on, or imprisoned on corruption charges. In the coming years, El Nuevo Día, the country's leading newspaper, would publish an editorial arguing that the Rosselló administrations had been the most corrupt period in the history of Puerto Rico. There has not been a government as corrupt as the Pedro Rosselló administration in 100 years. Rosselló's popularity began to wane. It waned even more when he announced plans to privatize the Puerto Rican Telephone Company, or PRTC. The previous governor, Rafael Hernández Colón, had also sought to privatize the PRTC, but widespread discontent had stopped the process. On June 18, 1997, telephone workers went on strike with massive support from different sectors of society. Under the banner, Puerto Rico no se vende, Puerto Rico is not for sale, protests took place in San Juan and across the archipelago. Some turned violent. Images of protesters bloodied by police circulated in the national media. There was also a general strike where thousands of people took to the streets to demand a stop to the privatization process. Ultimately, The strike ended on July 21st, 1997, with a weekend labor movement and the official privatization of the PRTC. 2 years after the anti-privatization protests, another movement captured the nation's attention. This time, it originated in the island municipality of Vieques. Puerto Rico's two island municipalities, Vieques and Culebra, had been used as training grounds by the U.S. Navy for decades. This, however, did not go unchallenged. In the 1970s, a grassroots effort led by fishermen expelled them from Culebra. Fishermen also led the fight against the United States in Vieques during the same period. But it was not until 1999 that massive national mobilizations began to echo and amplify Vieques' demands. For decades, residents of Vieques had complained about the U.S. Navy's occupation of the island, where they would farm or fish.
Talk about it.
The occupation also endangered their lives. A study prepared for the Secretary of the Navy noted that the United States bombed Vieques as part of their exercises approximately 180 days per year. In 1998, they dropped 23,000 bombs, 17,000 of them with live munitions, or an average of 80 bombs per day. Historian Marie Cruz Soto had shown that Vieques, an impoverished community of 9,000 people with limited and unreliable means of transportation to nearby islands, has suffered from higher morbidity and mortality rates than the rest of the archipelago due to their inability to access health care.
Listen to this.
Cancer rates, which some trace to the U.S. Navy's contamination, are higher there than in the rest of the Puerto Rican archipelago. On April 19, 1999, a U.S. Navy jet misfired a bomb and killed civilian guard David Sanes. Public outcry was immediate. Hundreds of protesters broke into and camped on Navy-controlled land. National and international celebrities joined the cause and called for the U.S. government to immediately remove the U.S. Navy from Vieques.
Thank you for the follow.
On February 21st, 2000, approximately 150,000 people took to the streets demanding an immediate exit, the largest march recorded in Puerto Rican history until that point. The struggle continued until 2003, when the U.S. Navy officially left the island.
Listen.
Social movements proliferated at the end of the 20th century, yet the government continued its mano dura approach even after Rosselló stepped down. Punitive governance, as Marisol Lebrón has demonstrated, continued uninterrupted and became an integral part of subsequent political administrations. The FBI also maintained its punitive approach toward the pro-independence movement. On September 23, 2005, thousands of Puerto Ricans celebrated the Grito de Lares. Filiberto Ojeda Ríos, the leader of the Macheteros, sent a recorded message from the underground. He had been living clandestinely for decades, evading local and federal authorities. As independentistas listened to his voice through the speakers, the FBI, in collaboration with Governor Rafael Acevedo Vilás' administration, raided Filiberto's house in the western town of Hormigueros, where he lived with his life partner, Elma Beatriz Rosado Barbosa. The FBI operation had been surveilling the property for days. At 4:28 p.m., agents began shooting at the house. Fearing for his life, Filiberto responded. In the gunfire, a bullet perforated his lung. Although he could have been taken alive, he was left to bleed to death. The assassination of Filiberto Ojeda Ríos served as a powerful reminder of how the FBI had operated in Puerto Rico for decades. Thousands of people attended his wake at the Puerto Rican Athenaeum and the Bar Association of Puerto Rico. As they transported his remains to his hometown of Naguabo, Puerto Ricans from different political orientations stood on the side of the road to bid the commander one last farewell.
Appreciate everybody tapping in. Let's set another goal to 15K. We're going to do one more chapter. We have 2 hours and 24 minutes left of this book. So we're going to finish out one more chapter. I'm pretty sure it's probably like 30 to 40 minutes. So that way tomorrow we got about an hour and a half to complete the series. But let's keep tapping that screen, sharing this live. I appreciate everybody tapping in with me. And don't forget, all episodes, if you want to go back and catch them, they are on YouTube, AfroTaino88, the same that's on here on TikTok. You can always revisit and go re-listen to any of the books that we've listened to up here. I appreciate everybody. Let's get back into it.
Chapter 12.
41 minutes.
Broken Promises and Ongoing Resistance. At the turn of the 21st century, Puerto Rico was trapped in an hourglass, and the sand was quickly running out. For decades, the archipelago's economy had depended on foreign investments. Attracting U.S. corporations had been the hallmark of the mid-20th century Operation Bootstrap. When that so-called economic miracle came to an end, Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code made Puerto Rico a tax haven. In 1996, however, the U.S. Congress began to phase out Section 936. It would officially end on April 30th, 2006. After Governor Rosselló left office, two PPD administrations, those of Sila Maria Calderón, 2001-5, and Aníbal Acevedo Vilá, 2005-9, all but continued the neoliberal policies of the 1990s. No plan was put in place for when 936 ended, and no decisions were made about how to address the inevitable exodus of corporations that would come with it. For the pro-statehood movement, the passing of Section 936 had been a victory that made Puerto Rico equal to the states of the Union. Bill Clinton presented himself as a strong man who was able to close this tax loophole. For Puerto Rico, however, the lack of a coherent economic plan after the end of 936 was a fiscal disaster. Over 40% of the companies that had benefited from this local tax exemption left the island after 2006, resulting in the loss of 67,800 jobs between 2009 and 2015. April 30th, 2006 arrived, and the Puerto Rican Legislative Assembly was deadlocked. Its members could not agree on Puerto Rico's fiscal budget as Section 936 finally expired. The following day, May 1st, 2006, the Puerto Rican government officially shut down for 2 weeks. 95,762 employees were furloughed, and 1,600 public employees were temporarily dismissed. Beyond the immediate impact, the end of 936 marked the beginning of an economic recession that plagued Puerto Rico for the following decades. It also confirmed what everyone knew and feared. The fiscal collapse of Puerto Rico was not some future event to theorize. It was already happening. As Puerto Ricans looked with dismay at the unraveling crisis, others took to the streets to protest. May Day, or International Workers' Day, had been celebrated in Puerto Rico since 1899, the year after the U.S. occupation. The event continued.
That's when they started the unions.
To be commemorated with public demonstrations, militant actions, and cultural events throughout the 20th and 21st centuries.
Over there, I mean, not in the United States. Over there.
On May the 1st, 2006, labor unions and radical organizations marched through the Milla de Oro, Puerto Rico's financial district. Thousands of people protested the dire fiscal and social situation that seemed to be spiraling out of control. In the crowd, a group of workers, students, musicians, and artists launched a new theater project, Papel Machete. One of its members, Jorge Díaz Ortiz, noted that they were a community-based educational arts program that agitated for social struggle. Through the use of paper maché as a medium, argued Diaz-Ortiz, we explore a wide range of art forms and styles. We perform in communities, theaters, streets, and protests using puppets, masks, objects, and music to denounce exploitation, build solidarity, and agitate people to bring them to action in the struggles of the frontline communities of the working class. Papel Machete used street theater to educate people. They also created giant puppets that would stand tall in the massive protests that began to take place in Puerto Rico. The group was part of a broader culture of resistance that proliferated as the fiscal crisis worsened. In the lead-up to the 2008 elections, Papel Machete launched their own political candidate for the governor's race, Ninguno, which they translated as no one. Its slogan was, Todos prometen, ninguno cumple. All of them make promises, no one fulfills them. Armed with a paper mache head, Ninguno's campaign traveled through working-class neighborhoods across the archipelago, accompanied by Papel Machete's cultural offerings.
Listen, guys.
The 2008 elections left the archipelago's bipartisan tradition intact, however. Governor Acevedo Vilá ran for a second term in office. During his campaign, Acevedo Vilá was charged with 24 federal counts of corruption. It came as no surprise that his contender from the PNP, Puerto Rico's resident commissioner in Washington, Luis G. Fortuño, won the ticket by the biggest margin in the country's electoral history, 224,894 votes. It was time for Puerto Rico's Medicina Amarga, bitter pill, as Fortuño referred to his economic program. Fortuño's bitter pill. Luis G. Fortuño ran as a father figure. He was presented as the responsible adult who would fix Puerto Rico's problems. When it came to the economy, he borrowed arguments from other Latin American politicians who embraced neoliberal policies. Puerto Rico needed a dose of Medicina Amarga. Shortly after taking office, he organized the Consejo Asesor de Reconstrucción Económica y Fiscal, Fiscal and Economic Reconstruction Advising Committee, or CAREF. It was composed of bankers and business people, an elite group that operated as Puerto Rico's colonial administrators. As expected, CAREF recommended an austerity package, including massive layoffs, freezing collective bargaining agreements, and eliminating other workers' rights. U.S. economists had often complained about the labor protections that Puerto Rican workers enjoyed. As a result, Governor Fortuño signed a fiscal emergency law, colloquially known as Public Law 7. It was followed by the layoff of 17,000 government employees. The public sector was the largest employer in the archipelago. Public Law 7 devastated its ranks. Following Rosselló's neoliberal ethos, Fortuño sought to shrink the government through privatization and layoffs. After the 2008 elections, the PNP dominated the
all this privatization the island's been doing for all these fucking years is the reason why we don't own shit.
executive branch, the legislature, most townships, and even the Supreme Court. Law 7 was signed without challenge. Fortuño also moved the PNP to the right, aligning himself with the most conservative fact.
The largest sector of jobs provided by Puerto Rico is the government sector. That's a problem. Like, that's a huge, huge, huge problem.
Within the U.S. Republican Party. During his administration, Puerto Rico accrued almost $11 billion in debt. If Pedro Rosselló's era is known for consolidating punitive governance, Fortunio perfected the art of governance through austerity. Even before Public Law 7 went into effect, unemployment had reached 16.1%. Criminality grew accordingly. Feuds between drug lords intensified, and people were caught in the crossfire, both figuratively and literally.
What do you expect to happen when you create a dynamic such as that? We've seen it happen in every place they so-called call a ghetto, right?
Instead of treating drug addiction as a medical problem, the government continued its punitive measures in response to the crisis. Homelessness reached a staggering 35.1% in 2009. As had happened in the past, many Puerto Ricans migrated to the United States in search of better living conditions. From 2004 to 2010, more than 176,000 people left the archipelago in search of jobs. The U.S. media has coined various economic processes in Puerto Rico miracles, suggesting there must be something truly divine about Puerto Rico. In U.S. conservative circles, Fortunio's policies were considered a miracle and a godsend to the GOP. His bitter pill consisted of austerity measures that exacerbated an already fragile social crisis and went hand in hand with a worsening fiscal situation. As Puerto Rican economist Jose Alameda noted, Fortunio's medicine was so sour that it killed the patient. The reduction in public costs and employment, and the incapacity of public-private alliance to create private investment made the medicine sourer. Instead of jump-starting, the economy contracted from minus 1.2% in 2007 to minus 3.8% in 2010. Those affected by his measures took to the streets to voice their discontent and make their demands. 3 years after the protests against the government response to the end of 936, May Day was again a scene of resistance. The labor movement used the 2009 May Day celebrations to publicly condemn Law 7 as a direct attack on rights they had obtained through decades of struggle. A protest atmosphere could soon be felt throughout Puerto Rico. Political graffiti and posters adorned urban walls. Small and sporadic protests took place in different parts of the archipelago, and some activists carried out acts of civil disobedience. Perhaps the most iconic action was when Roberto Garcia Diaz, a laid-off employee, threw an egg at Governor Fortunio during a press conference.
Thank you for the follow.
Garcia Diaz became known in cultural and political circles as tipo común, common guy. It was not unusual for protest banners and posters to display drawings or messages alluding to the incident. On October 15th, 100,000 people united under the banner of All Puerto Rico for Puerto Rico to demand that the strictest measures of Law 7 be relaxed. Protesters marched from 8 different points in San Juan's urban area and converged in front of Plaza Las Americas, the Caribbean's largest shopping mall and a powerful symbol of consumerism. It was also the site where Luis Muñoz Marin had given his famous speech after returning from exile in 1972. According to Puerto Rican scholar Arlene Davila, the selection of Plaza Las Americas as the gathering point showcased a key predicament of neoliberalism, that if there are no jobs, there can't be shopping. The massive demonstration was to converge in front of Plaza Las Americas and adjourn after a series of speeches by various members of different social and activist organizations.
And like I said yesterday, Plaza de America is the largest mall throughout the Caribbean islands. So imagine it not being able to produce jobs.
But people were angry and desperate. The protests soon involved more than simply condemning Law 7. University students promised to challenge the Fortuño administration if he proceeded with slashing the UPR's already dire budget, and a group of students and members of radical organizations occupied Highway 52, one of San Juan's main expressways. The protesters first clashed with commuters demanding to pass.
Thank you for the follow.
The demonstrators explained that they needed to stop traffic to rebuild Puerto Rico. After a few hours, the police and march organizers tried to convince those occupying the highway to leave. But protesters started burning tires and constructing makeshift barricades to protect themselves from the highly militarized police force that grew by the minute. When it seemed that a violent clash was inevitable, Rafael Cancel Miranda, a former political prisoner who had attacked the U.S. Congress in 1954, arrived on the scene. He had been at home when he saw images of the highway occupation on the local news. Cancel Miranda tried to dissuade protesters from continuing their standoff with the police. It was going to be a bloodbath, he argued. If students and protesters had weapons, he would join them in fighting the police. But that was not the case. They were outnumbered and outgunned. As someone with a lifelong record of militancy, Cancel Miranda struck a chord with protesters. They organized an impromptu assembly on the occupied highway and democratically decided to march back to the UPR. The October 15 demonstrations were a prelude to a massive university strike that took place barely 6 months later. To assess the national situation and how it impacted the university, the UPR's General Study Assembly of the Rio Piedras campus created comités de acción based on the university's colleges: humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, education, and the School of Law. These comités de acción organized a series of protests and short-lived strikes. In the process, they laid the groundwork for a system-wide strike. When the UPR announced that it planned to eliminate admission fee exemptions and was looking to impose an $800 increase in tuition to address the government's austerity measures, students called for a General Assembly on April 13, 2010. They decreed a 48-hour work stoppage that became a massive strike, shutting down 10 of the 11 UPR campuses. The UPR strike occurred in 2 phases. The first consisted of the student occupation of campuses for more than 2 months, from April to June 2010. They accomplished their objectives. The administration froze the proposed elimination of fee exemptions and the $800 increase. The second phase took place the following semester as the UPR sought to re-implement the increase again, and students responded with another strike in spring 2011. While students had occupied the campuses during the initial phase of the strike, by the second phase, the police and university administration reacted by taking out the gates of the university and inviting the Puerto Rican police to enter the campus, something that had not happened since the strikes of the 1970s and 1980s. From 2010 to 2011, UPR students were on strike intermittently for almost a full academic year, redefining the way people protested in Puerto Rico. During the occupation of the campuses, students created horizontal forms of organizing. They also planted communal gardens to feed themselves, organized cultural events, and even created a pirate radio station, Radio Huelga, which was broadcast outside the university gates.
Really quick, everybody, we got 22 minutes and 51 seconds left. We got 13K. Let's try to end this chapter out with a bang with 20K. I got to go to the side and stretch because my back is killing me. It's been a long week working and shit. But tap that screen, share this live. I appreciate everybody tapping in today. And don't forget, everything will be uploaded onto YouTube. The YouTube channel is AfroTaino88. And don't forget, all gifts and donations will be going to the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project in May. Let's tap that screen. Let's keep it going.
Instead of following the traditional modes of protest, students relied on direct action, democratic assemblies, and occupations. This process radicalized a generation of activists who felt empowered by creating street art, barricades, and lifelong friendships. These experiences served as a catalyst for many who continued their grassroots activism after graduating. Others honed their political skills and later served in government positions. Death spiral. When Fortuño announced his re-election bid, it was clear that most Puerto Ricans were unhappy with his economic policies. Without a clear political program or fiscal plan, the PPD's candidate, Alejandro Garcia Padilla, relied on that discontent to rally votes that could punish the PNP and Fortuño for his actions. Garcia Padilla won the 2012 elections, but he did not deviate from the privatization measures that were integral to the Fortuño administration. In fact, one of Garcia Padilla's first acts was to privatize the Luis Muñoz Marin Airport. While the news was received with a wave of social protests, the privatization process continued and was consolidated in 2013. To cope with the fiscal situation in the archipelago, Governor Garcia Padilla's administration successfully passed Act 66. While it did not entail the elimination of public jobs, it did hamper the bargaining power of unions and employees from the private sector. The law effectively froze wages while eliminating previously negotiated increases. It also reduced public employees' benefits, including vacations, promotions, and bonuses. In February 2014, the credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded Puerto Rico's bonds to junk status. Most owners of these bonds remain anonymous, despite demands for transparency from journalists, civic society, and the Puerto Rican government. Instead of scaring investors away, a month after Puerto Rico's credit was downgraded, a total of $3.4 billion in new bonds were sold, mainly to hedge funds. Why Puerto Rico's bonds were attractive to hedge funds goes back to the early days of U.S. colonialism. The Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917 not only granted Puerto Ricans their citizenship, it also made Puerto Rican bonds triple tax exempt, meaning they would not be taxed at the municipal, state, or federal level. The Puerto Rican Constitution of 1952 made repayment of public debt a priority over the finance of public services. Then, in 1984, Congress explicitly excluded Puerto Rico from Chapter 9 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code, hampering any possibility of refinancing its debt.
I hope that kind of clarifies for some of the people who always go to Puerto Rico's debt as a hindrance to the United States versus seeing the impact and the position that the United States put Puerto Rico in. I'm just saying.
This meant that as Puerto Rico's bonds were downgraded to junk status and their prices plummeted, vulture funds bought them knowing that Puerto Rico would be forced to pay them back.
Listen.
The fiscal situation triggered a series of difficult conversations about Puerto Rico and its colonial condition.
This is why I hate when people bring up Puerto Rico's debt without really analyzing the situation and seeing how much of a hand the United States had into that, because those exact same bonds would be illegal to sell here in the United States because they're worthless.
Major media outlets noted that it was going to be the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. Like other states, Puerto Rico could not claim bankruptcy exemptions. Unlike states, however, Puerto Rican corporations or municipalities could not file for bankruptcy. This had not always been the case, but Puerto Rico had this right mysteriously revoked in the early 1980s.
Listen.
By 2014, the debt had reached unprecedented levels. The Commonwealth owed $72 billion, with another $42 billion owed to pensions.
Listen.
The economic situation only exacerbated social problems, creating a humanitarian crisis.
Listen.
The median household income was $19,518, one-third of that of the United States.
If they were already in an economic crisis, just imagine the impact that caused when that period of time came. Imagine.
About 46% of the population lived below the federal poverty level, with 57% of children living in poverty. On June 29, 2015, Governor Garcia Padilla delivered a national message to the people of Puerto Rico. For journalist Ed Morales, Garcia Padilla's speech was perhaps the second most important message delivered by a Puerto Rican statesman since Luis Muñoz Marin's 1952 proclamation of the Commonwealth. Garcia Padilla said what everyone already knew. The debt was unpayable. Puerto Rico did not have access to a bankruptcy court, and it did not have access to international financing institutions like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank.
So what does that mean?
Describing the situation as a death spiral, Garcia Padilla declared that the Puerto Rican government could not continue paying the debt. News of Puerto Rico's situation spread, and Washington addressed it the following year. A bailout was out of the question, more so in an election year. Instead of proposing an audit to explore the reasons for the debt and to also verify its legality, many activists and professionals noted that most of the debt might have been illegally accrued. The Obama administration opted to create a fiscal oversight board. In a tense atmosphere of negotiations between Republicans and Democrats, high-profile individuals used their platforms to lobby for the Promesa bill.
Please pay attention.
Playwright
Please.
Lin-Manuel Miranda, whose family is part of the New York Democratic establishment, rapped on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver about the need to help Puerto Rico, even offering Democrats tickets to his award-winning Broadway show, Hamilton.
Listen.
On June 30th, 2016, President Barack Obama signed the Promesa bill into law. As political theorist Francisco Fortunio Bernier notes, with Promesa, a Republican-conceived bill that garnered Hillary Clinton's support and Barack Obama's signature, any veneer of autonomy in Puerto Rico has been stripped from the island's relation to the United States and financial capital. Puerto Rico has reverted from the self-managed colonialism inaugurated by the Commonwealth in 1952 to a reconstructed direct colonialism articulated in a specifically neoliberal way.
Listen.
The signing of the Promesa bill took place just weeks after the Supreme Court once again ratified Puerto Rico's colonial status in Puerto Rico v. Sánchez Valle. The case was heard after two individuals, Luis M. Sánchez and Gómez Vázquez.
This is what happened when the news media outlet doesn't give you the complete context of what's happening locally and geopolitically.
Were prosecuted on gun charges in both federal and local courts. While they pleaded guilty at the federal level, they argued that they could not be tried in the local courts. The case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, which ended up agreeing with them by a vote of 6-2. By not allowing the Puerto Rican courts to litigate the case separately, the decision shattered any lingering illusion of Puerto Rico's sovereignty. The Promesa law created Puerto Rico's Fiscal Oversight and Management Board, composed of 7 unelected members directly named by the President of the United States. The
Unelected, selected by the President of the United States.
board also has 5 unelected officers. Colloquially known by Puerto Ricans as La Junta, the board's objective is to guarantee the repayment of the Commonwealth's debt and to provide a method for a covered territory to achieve fiscal responsibility and access to the capital markets, as established in Title I of the bill. To conduct its business, the junta was given ample power and allowed to operate independently of the Puerto Rican legislative and executive branches. In May 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the junta had sovereign immunity and does not need to comply with requests from journalists for documents about the board's operations, even when those requests stemmed from a provision in the Puerto Rican Constitution.
Y'all paying attention, right? If you're not, you can always catch this episode on YouTube, Afro Taino 88. It will be uploaded directly after I finish this live.
Given its mandate, the junta did not arrive in Puerto Rico seeking to strike a balance between social and fiscal needs.
No.
It proposed a series of austerity measures that impacted every part of Puerto Rican society. Junta approved fiscal budgets, slashed funds for public services. The health department, for example, received a massive cut at a moment when the country was dealing with a failing hospital infrastructure and a health epidemic due to the spread of Zika, chikungunya, and dengue.
And when you look at the health crisis now in Puerto Rico and the hospital crisis now in Puerto Rico, where there's lack of resources, lack of hospitals, lack of personnel to even work in the hospitals, think of the promesa, because that's what limited the budget to be able to get the resources they need to run functioning hospitals in a manner that service the people in a correct way. I'm just saying, that's one. Let's keep going.
All tied to the Aedes aegypti mosquito. This was happening as doctors and nurses left the island en masse, looking for better job opportunities in the United States.
Because if you're cutting budgets, which means you're cutting how much you're paying individuals, but you're also cutting the limited of resources that they need to be able to complete their job successfully. So you're putting people who work in the medical field in a very horrendous situation for them to be able to perform their jobs.
As feminist scholar Marisol Lebron notes, the debt crisis, of course, didn't create all these problems, but it has deepened them. The junta proposed budget cuts as protests intensified. When the junta organized their first Promesa conference in August 2016, dozens of demonstrators and activists...
But I just don't want to miss over this part, right? The medical field is just one sector that the Promesa impacted. You have to look at the educational field as well. This is a huge reasoning behind a lot of school closings, which also goes back into lack of jobs because a lot of people fled the island, so that's leaving less children to be able to populate these schools, giving them more reasons to be able to shut these schools down and not be able to provide the services that these community needs to be a thriving community. That's how, not for nothing, the Marcos Sanchez Community Center, they're a product of that, right? The Promesa bill really impacted them. The depopulation of Yabucoa really impacted them, that they shut down the school. And if you guys follow me and you guys seen the videos of the Marcos Sanchez Community Center, you would see how big it is and how detrimental that space is for the community of Yabucoa. Please go look it up, the Marcos Sanchez Community Center in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico. We will be down there in May. May 2nd to the 10th. So we will be at the Marcos Sanchez Community Center doing what we normally do every 6 to 8 months. Boots on the ground.
From different organizations blocked the Condado Plaza Hilton where the event was to take place. Some activists arrived at 5 in the morning. For hours, the police tried to disperse the crowd using force and pepper spray. As people saw what was happening on TV, more protesters showed up. The event was so successful that the conference attendees needed to be escorted to the Seaside Hotel by boat because protesters had blocked all the main entrances. The junta began its work just as another election cycle took place. Ricardo Rosselló, son of former Governor Pedro Rosselló, won the governorship for the PNP in 2016. He won the ballot box with only 42% of the vote, the lowest number in Puerto Rico's electoral history. Ricky Rosselló, as he was colloquially known, received his BA from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Michigan. He was the second youngest governor elected to office. In 2014, Bolivian author Lupe Andrade accused him of plagiarizing one of his concepts for a newspaper column. He spent some time as an assistant professor at the Universidad Ana G. Méndez, which has ties to the PNP, and later at the UPR's medical school. Some people questioned his credentials and cried favoritism. Following in his predecessor's footsteps, Ricardo Rosselló's first executive order was to declare a fiscal emergency in Puerto Rico, allowing the government to promote and pass unpopular legislation. The labor movement became a target of both the junta and the Rosselló administration. An article published in The Economist in April 2018 noted that Puerto Ricans enjoy among the most generous protection of any American worker, including mandatory holidays and severance pay. What the article failed to mention, however, was that Puerto Rican workers were paid a third of what U.S. workers earned. The junta echoed the sentiments against labor when it stated that Puerto Rican benefits were far beyond those required by any mainland state.
Listen, a little homework. I want you guys to all look up the minimum. Matter of fact, somebody drop it in the comments. What is the minimum wage of Puerto Rico today? What is the minimum wage? Somebody drop it in the comments. Somebody look it up really quick. What is the minimum wage de Puerto Rico today in 2025?
On February 5th, 2018, the junta sent a letter to Rosselló emphasizing the need to offset labor costs because such costs made Puerto Rico non-competitive. The following month, the Rosselló administration announced their plan to repeal Act 80, which provided protections against arbitrary dismissals and benefits to those unjustly fired. While the announcement was seen as a victory for the junta, the backlash from different social sectors and members of his own party was immediate. 8 days after his declaration, Rosselló changed his attitude toward repealing the labor legislation, saying that the junta had pressured him to repeal the act. Education was also gravely impacted by the...
Okay, now somebody tell me what is the minimum wage in New York City today? There's a reason why I'm asking.
Policies enacted by the Rosselló administration with the junta's approval. Rosselló appointed Julia Kelleher to head Puerto Rico's Department of Education. The junta had noted that the government needed to save at least $40 million every month. Part of their recommendations included closing almost 300 schools. The closing of schools was not new. As social justice education scholar Aurora Santiago Ortiz has noted, the Puerto Rican government closed...
Okay, so we got 1050 Puerto Rico right now, and we got 1650. If those numbers are accurate, that's a $6 differential, right? Due to the Jones Act, right? The 20% to 15 to 20% increase on all goods coming in, including the oil that supplies the power plant, right? That affects the wattages of what Puerto Ricanos pay for electricity is equivalent to what New York City pays in electricity. A gallon of milk is equivalent to what New York City pays in for a gallon of milk. Sometimes even higher in Puerto Rico because it fluctuates as well. Eggs cost the same as what eggs cost in New York City. If you're a tobacco smoker, cigarettes cost the same exact price, if not sometimes higher in Puerto Rico than it does in New York City. And I'm using New York City an example because we know that it's one of the most expensive states within the union. And I'm just comparing the cost of living is almost equivalent when it comes to cost of goods in Puerto Rico than it is in NYC. That's why I say that. And that $6 differential is a major impact.
63 schools,
especially when there's lack of jobs and resources.
From 2015 to 2016, citing low enrollment due in part to migration. Parents, students, and a large swath of the population opposed the school closings. Kelleher responded to the critiques in a New York Times interview by saying, "We have to close schools. We are going to close schools." In May 2017, Kelleher announced the closing of 165 schools. The following year, she added another 263 schools. The social impact was immediately felt in poor and working-class communities that suffered the most. Kelleher's policies also opened the door to the privatization of the public school system. The UPR again became a target. Governor Rosselló proposed cutting the university's already precarious annual budget by $300 million for the 2017-18 academic year. Responding to the announcement, the junta noted, "The board is supportive of the governor's difficult decision to reduce subsidies to the University of Puerto Rico by $300 million in fiscal year 19. The magnitude of the government's structural deficit, however, requires that this reduction in annual subsidy grow to a minimum of $450 million by fiscal year 21. This was almost half of the UPR's entire budget. The student body found this unacceptable. They feared that such cuts would effectively kill the university. On March 21, 2017, the UPR's Rio Piedras campus was again shut down by students on strike. 2 weeks later, on April 5th, 10,000 students from the UPR's 13 campuses met in San Juan for a general assembly. Some of their chants showcased their combative yet joyful spirit. "Si en vez de vino bebieran malta, estos recortes no harían falta." If instead of wine they drank malta, these cuts would not be necessary. 11 of the 13 campuses declared a strike with 6 demands: no penalties for students participating in the strike, reforms to allow representation from all sectors of the university community, zero tuition hikes or elimination of enrollment exemptions, zero budget cuts to the UPR, the restitution of a civic commission to audit the Puerto Rican debt, and the moratorium on debt payments before and during the auditing process. Strikes were nothing new at the UPR. But unlike previous strikes, students' call to audit the debt was a political demand that transcended the university gates and forced the government to challenge the junta. After 72 days, all campuses lifted the strike. 11 students faced criminal charges, but these were eventually dropped. While the UPR did not meet striking students' demands, some participants argued that the best outcome was the strike itself, as it radicalized a new generation of students, as it happened in 2010. During the strike, students also gave serious thought to the debt and the proposed cuts to the UPR. They developed alternative fiscal plans that were delivered to the Puerto Rican legislature and were ultimately ignored. As had happened in the past, May Day celebrations became a boiling point. The 2017 celebration was the first May Day since the junta's creation. On that day, protests began early in the morning. The Afro-feminist group Colectiva Feminista en Construcción began an unexpected cacerolazo at 5 a.m. in front of the governor's mansion. They were attacked and dispersed by the police. Meanwhile, another group, Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas, obstructed the entrance to the Luis Muñoz Marín Airport, while other groups blocked congested city roads, making their anger felt throughout San Juan's urban landscape. All these actions took place before the official labor-sponsored celebrations began.
Don't worry if you're late, you can always catch the episode on YouTube, Afro Taino 88. That's the beauty of it. The archive is there for y'all to go back and always keep up to date with what we got going on. Don't stress it. You live.
Those participating in this May Day did not come from the traditional worlds of labor. New organizations composed of students, queer folks, and non-unionized precarious workers took center stage. As one of their slogans declared, they'd had everything taken away from them, even fear. As the groups marched through Puerto Rico's financial district, protesters began throwing objects at banks, shattering several glass walls. This triggered police intervention and led to the arrest of 17. One of them, Nina Dros, served a 37-month sentence in a federal prison on charges of arson. She was accused of trying to set fire to a building owned by Puerto Rico's Banco Popular. Jose Carrion III, the junta's chairman, is related to Richard Carrion, the bank's owner. The May Day event demonstrated that a collective rage was brewing in Puerto Rico. Protesters understood the symbolic power of the buildings they threw rocks at. To them, these banks were robbing people of their future. The protests concerned the Puerto Rican government greatly. But any tensions between protesters, the government, and the junta came to a halt 4 months later when Hurricane Maria barreled through Puerto Rico.
That was a good, this was a good chapter, man. It talked about the dead. It talked about the Promesa bill. It talked about a lot. You guys, if you guys missed it, don't worry about it. I will be uploading this right when I end this live, so you guys can always go catch up and keep up to date with what we talked about and what we listened to here on the live. I really appreciate all the new followers and everybody supporting me. Like I said, I like to start and end it with my poem. So if you guys want to stick around, show me some love and support, let's tap that screen. I try to set the goal to 20K. We made it to 16K, but let's see where we ended out with the poem. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody, man. When I get new followers, that means people are really intrigued with the content that I'm putting out there.
My journey these past couple of years hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent. It was worth it.
Yo, really quick, these clips that I'm at, like the place that I'm at, it's in the Marco Sanchez Community Center. It's in Yabucoa. That right there is on the second floor of one of the buildings. It's the auditorium. So that's the platform. That's the stage. We just going through it. As you can see, even a lot of the papers, the school arts and all that was left there. Like, it's been a huge effort of work to be able to transform the couple of buildings we have transformed. And it's only going to become better because we're just making our way down the line, finishing each room, you know, having them allocated to certain things that the Marco Sanchez Community Center needs for the community. So, but let me shut up and play my poem.
Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just
Nah, I'm not in PR right now. I'm in Connecticut. I'm from New York. I moved out to Connecticut a couple of years ago, like 5-6 years ago. But I go to Puerto Rico every 6 to 8 months with the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. Go check out my page. Go look at a couple of my videos. You can see some of the work we've done at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So I'm down there every 6 to 8 months. And sometimes I stay a month. Sometimes I stay a couple of weeks. So whatever, you know what I mean, we do. Now listen, we always accepting volunteers. We'll chat after this. Let me play this so I don't mess up the rhythm of the poetry, but let's get it.
Another statistic that I can seek to be who I want to be.
Look at the
Not
buildings.
what they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Pedri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit, the promotion that never came and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you got to be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen. And within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chamber, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre, pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Yeah, I appreciate everybody, man. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That is a wrap, y'all. Yo, really quick, so if anybody's interested in the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project, just do me a favor, just go check out a couple of my videos. We accepting volunteers. If you're already on the island, it is in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico, at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. You can Google the address. You could definitely, as the days get closer, I will be saying what days would be at the Marco Sanchez. It normally be during the week, so we'll probably do like Monday through Friday. We get there on the 2nd, so I think that's what, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're there, and then Saturday and Sunday, we'll be getting ready to come back. But yeah, so if anybody want to volunteer, like I said, please go look up the Marco Sanchez Community Center. Go follow them on Facebook. They have a page. They're trying to draw as much attention as possible to be able to get as much resources as possible, because it's needed in the community. The big crisis that they're having over there is that a lot of the youth has left due to economical factors, due to, lack of schools. So a lot of the ones who are rebuilding building the center are the seniors. So this is why for me, I feel like it's most important. This is how we build bridges. This is how we give back to the island and have a space where we can have a real better understanding of both struggle. Because I'm going to keep saying it.
To understand the full Boricua struggle, you have to understand the full Boricua struggle. You got to study what happened on the island. You got to understand what happened in the diaspora, because we are a continuation of one another. And history has us where we're constantly trying to put a separation and division amongst each other. And that's just some colonial bullshit that we perpetuate due to, the Spanish, the United States, and all that other bullshit. But like I said, please go look up the Marco Sanchez Community Center. Go look out some of my videos that I posted in Puerto Rico. We was there a couple of months ago. I know we got a couple of months till we back down there, but we're trying to bring awareness and organize now, so that way we can have enough things down there to do what we got to do. But with that being said, I appreciate everybody, all the love and support. Go check out the YouTube, Afro Taino 88. This episode will be up there in about an hour or so, depending on how fast I upload it. But I'm gonna say that's a wrap, y'all. Peace, blessing, positivity, and I'm gonna catch you guys tomorrow. We have an hour and 45 minutes left of the book, so that's gonna be a big accomplishment. We finished another book, y'all, but let's get to it. I'm gonna see y'all tomorrow. Peace, blessing, positivity.